It's been a while since I filmed from my little bench studio here where I do all the work on the quads. In fact, I don't remember that I've ever shot a video from where I build my quads and stuff. Usually I don't do that because it's like super messy in here, and yeah, it's just like that. Just not used to it. I don't have a professional vlogger set up with all the nice lighting and focus, soft focus, whatever. I wanted to do a quick catch up on what's been going on because I have not been posting many flight videos, which is really weird for me. But that doesn't mean I haven't been busy. I have been very busy indeed. Busy with what, you might ask? Well, basically, I have been diving deep down into the world of micro builds. So without further ado, let's focus this camera on some quads. All right, so let's start with this little guy here, because really, for me, the Tadpole is where it all began, the micro craze. So I bought one of these guys, bind and fly from Armattan directly. Actually, I bought two of them. So I bought one, and I was pretty blown away by it. It flies incredibly. The performance on these things is like super crazy. It's on par with any 5-inch freestyler I've ever flown. The performance was there. I went out, I freestyled some bandos. I was like blown away, and I was thinking, wow, these micros, there is something to them. Got super interested in these things for a couple of reasons. So basically, two reasons for it. Number one, I flew those Tadpoles, and I was like super blown away by not only the performance, but like how compact they were, how small the batteries were. They're just so portable and also so quiet. Like when I was flying around with my little Tadpole in the bando, in the Tadpole bando video I posted, some other dudes rocked up. And they didn't even know I was flying a quad, even though I was like bombing up and down buildings, doing dives and all this crazy stuff. So it had this awesome performance. It had this like compactness, which is really convenient for carrying around and all that. The batteries are smaller, yada yada. But the other thing that kind of pushed it over the edge was good old COVID, aka the CV, aka whatever. So like quite a few other people, so I hear. Although apparently everyone on Facebook is hunky-dory. Yeah, I kind of lost my full-time gig due to COVID, and so I ended up going from full-time stuff to like gigging part-time, which was all right, but it was getting to a point where I was thinking, okay, yeah, I might actually have to move back to Canada, where I'm from, because I'm actually Canadian. I'm not from Dubai, obviously, you know. And yeah, Canada seems to have this 250 gram limit on quads. Like, apparently in Canada you can fly 5 inches, but you need to register, and there's all these restrictions on where you can fly and blah blah blah. But if you're under the magic 250 benchmark, apparently you're good to go. So I was thinking, on some level, like, crap, if I have to go back to Canada, like, what am I gonna do? There are two things that keep me sane that I have found in this world, and one of them is driving cars really fast, usually, but not necessarily fast, just driving cars, manual transmissions, nice. I love it. I love to drive. I love cars, hard and slow. You know, driving is one of the things that brings me to the whole Zen flow state thing. The other thing is, of course, FPV. And so I was thinking, when I go back, I'm not gonna go back super rich, so I'm probably not gonna have a car. So like, what do I do for flying if I can't drive out to go to the forest or whatever to fly a 5-inch, and what to do? So 250 gram or sub 250 suddenly became really attractive. So I became even more curious about the sub 250 category. The other thing though was that I got interested in the whole Cine thing and the idea of being able to fly like really near people, and because I love doing proximity flying, so I love flying really close to stuff, and I wanted to experiment with doing some indoor flying, maybe do some commercial stuff to earn a bit of money on the side, given the COVID situation and stuff, but also it would just be fun to do because it's super cool. You can get nice shots. I always wanted to experiment with that too. So basically, so far I'm looking for something sub 250 that performs well and can Cine, which means it's got an Acro well, got to be safe around people, but it's also got to like get really good video somehow. And so that is where the fun begins. This is the micro that originally blew my mind. I was like, what? How is this even possible that they not only perform like that, but fly so well? So I bought another one and I tried actually flying this guy with the GoPro on it, and it actually carried the GoPro, you know, in a cruising way, but you know, it obviously cannot Acro with the GoPro. So eventually though, I broke both of my tadpoles. Like I had crashes and one of the motors went out. Even this one's broken now, so he's got a motor out. I actually don't know if it's the motor or the ESC or what's up, but that kind of bugged me. So immediately I'm thinking, crap, how can I fix this thing? And that's when, you know, I looked inside at this guy, and this build is like from the factory. So it's like super, super exquisite and just like beautifully put together and all that good stuff. But what I quickly found when I opened this thing up is like all the parts are super tiny, and you know, super tiny to the point like I can't even solder all these things because I've got like really shaky hands. My soldering skills are not all that, and so I literally could not. I actually blew up one of the ESCs by soldering it wrong somehow because the pins on this ESC in the bottom are really tiny and I just couldn't do it. So basically my line of thought went down this path of, all right, so what could I do to like build my own tadpole, but I want something that still has the performance of this guy, but I want it to have maybe a little more thrust capability to handle a GoPro, like particularly a full-size GoPro, and I'll get into why later on. So I wanted a little more load carrying capability, and I wanted something a little easier to work on in terms of the board. Basically, the OG went to the side. I'm keeping it as is. I'll maybe fix it someday. It's good how it is. I didn't want to mess with it. What I wanted to do is build my own. I'm stubborn that way, right? But enter these guys here. So I basically built my own tadpoles from scratch using, so I got bigger motors. These are Xing 1404s, about 3,000 something kV. So they're not massive high kV. They're a lot bigger than the stock motors. So the stock motors that come on the bind and flies are, I think, 1204 RC impower, 4,000 or 5,000 kV. They're really good for the weight of what this guy is. And actually, it's time to bring up the scale here because weight is kind of a thing. In terms of weight, you're looking at 66.1 grams for that guy. Of course, he doesn't have his top plate on him. So, and he doesn't have props on the screws. So he's gonna be like, I would say low 70 grams with props on. Of course, that's not including the batteries. So then that's where things get really interesting, right? And I'll get a little bit more into that later on. Wouldn't say it needed more power. It just needed basically motors that could carry a GoPro with less strain. I'll put it that way. That's a much more accurate way of saying it. So I wanted motors that are a little beefier, and I wanted a flight control stack that is easier to work on with like bigger solder pads and stuff like that. First off, you'll notice that these guys have bigger motors. They have Xing or Xing 1404 motors, which are quite a bit bigger than the RC impower. These are 1204s, I think, 5,000 kV. Much bigger motors on this quad. So these new quads have bigger motors, and they are running a whoop style flight controller on them, which is actually the CLRacing F7 Whoop AIO. The reason I went with this flight controller is because, as you can see, even from this angle, it's got giant solder pads for the motors. It's all in one, but it's got plenty of amps. It's got an F7 processor, and it's got BLHD32 in it. So basically, tons of headroom. You can tune, do whatever you want. It's got all the Betaflight features. Oh yeah, and in terms of Betaflight boards, what drives me nuts is when it's really hard to set up the Betaflight OSD and VTX control and all that. So this one has really nice big solder pads in the front, but it's also got direct solder pads for a Unify and a Crossfire. So the Unify just direct solders right onto the board with nice big solder pads. This is actually the Crossfire, so the Unify is tucked on the top. Crossfire is tucked in the side and goes around. It's actually designed so that you hard mount these, but I soft mounted them so that I can remove them and replace them easier, because when you use those pin headers, they're really hard to get off after you get them on. And the other trick in here is that it's got a Runcam split inside. So what the what? Runcam split, you say? Well, yeah, I wanted a way to capture my just random FPV adventures and stuff like that with minimal weight. So I have a Runcam split Whoop Edition version 3 stuck under there. And this was a really interesting build to work the kinks out of. So I ended up having to space the top stack out there a bit. So it's got some little metal spacers, and there's a reason they're metal spacers and not plastic. And there's a reason these metal spacers are metal and not plastic too. And that is because what I did when I first built this thing, the actual build itself went okay, like as far as wiring up the flight control stuff, but I had huge vibrations going on and all that kind of good stuff. And I was wondering what it was, and I eventually figured out that you don't want to jam the Crossfire and the Unify in between the split and the board. Like, you don't want to have stuff crammed in on top of your board, and you don't want to have your board mounted loosely. You want the board rigidly mounted, but with those little soft mounts so that it can do its whole gyro thing properly without weird vibrations getting into the gyro and all that kind of stuff. So there's a good amount of space between the board and the split on the top. And then when it came to cramming, I thought, yeah, I'll just cram the Crossfire and the Unify right in the top there under the top plate. And that's why I extended the top plate up, is so that I have enough room to run lipo straps really nice and comfortably. So they're nice and loose, easy to feed in and out. So nothing is under strain, nothing is crammed in. And that was the first thing I learned about these little nano quads, is they're really hard to build and they're really friggin' hard to tune. Super, super hard to tune. So you have to build them just right. You cannot mess around. You cannot just cram a bunch of stuff in them and expect it to work. And even if you do a good build, there's still a lot of tuning and setup and all that good stuff that you got to do to really get it to fly great. So we've got our scales zeroed out. So I'm gonna just chuck this guy on here, blah, blah, blah. And the weight is coming out at 104.8 grams as is, which is quite a bit heavier than the 60-70 grams that this guy was weighing, because remember, no props here, right? So we're gonna give some allowance for that. It's saying 68, but it's probably gonna be low 70s for the stock OG, whereas for the quote-unquote beefy Rhine build, we're up to 100 grams. We've gained like 35 grams roughly. Where did that weight go? Well, part of it went into the Runcam split, so it's really light, but you know, that thing weighs about, it's about 10 grams, 11 grams for the split and the camera, and the rest of the weight I think is in the motors, as far as I can tell. So if you're working with a sub 250 category, the weight starts to add up quick. So now let's do a little experiment here, because this is where this got really interesting for me. So we're at 104 grams. Now I'm gonna take one of my regular lipos that I fly, try and balance it on there. So we're up to 160 with a 450 lipo. Let's put a Insta360 Go on him. And now we're up to 178. That's not so bad actually. Am I weighing this correctly though? Let's check that first, because that can happen sometimes. Sometimes this doesn't fit. No, I think I'm accurate. How about that? Or am I? Yep, I am accurate. So yeah, 178 grams for this quad with a tiny battery and a little Insta360 Go. This little setup here will get me around 3 or 4 minutes easily of acro and all that good stuff. But that's not all. There's other options too. So besides the little batteries, I've got bigger batteries that can get you more flight time. I've flown this up to 9 minutes. So this is an 850 milliamp battery. So that brings our weight up to 216, all up weight. And let's stick an Insta360 on there. That's bringing us, that takes the weight up to around 234 grams. So now we're getting pretty near our 250 limit suddenly, which is like, whoa. And we haven't even talked about the whole Whoop stuff yet. But overall, happy with the setup. It's capable. It should carry heavy things if I want. So now this is where this is gonna get really funky. So what if I wanna carry a big GoPro on it? Well, what I would do usually is I take out the battery here. So I came up with a procedure to carry a full GoPro. So we take the battery out of the GoPro, take the lid off it, and what I did to try and lose a little weight from that GoPro is I designed this cable. So take that guy off for a second. So I have a little 5-volt cable here that weighs in at 8.6 grams. And that cable can power the GoPro through the USB port by plugging it in like so. And then boom, XT60 into there, and you're good to go. How much weight does that save? Well, let's check that out. So actually so this is kind of the setup that I run, is like the full-size GoPro minus the battery, and that's weighing in at like 100.5 grams. Is it worth it to fly a full GoPro without the battery? Well, let's see the weight difference. So, blah, 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 remove the cable. Let's put the battery back in this guy. The nice thing is it's really quick to do this in the field. Not that I've actually done that a lot. So here's our full GoPro Hero 8, and boom, stick him on the scales, 128 grams. So we're shaving 28 grams off the quad, and really when you're looking to save every gram you can, it matters. So that's why I did that, and it does work. But this is where it gets a bit crazy, guys, because you've probably already guessed that there's no way this thing is going to hit 250. And you would be correct. So with all that stuff on this quad, it is weighing all up weight is 260.2 grams with a full GoPro with that 5-volt crazy thing, and the LiPo was on there, but that's the small LiPo, right? So with this small LiPo and a full GoPro, I don't get much flight time out of this. You're talking probably about 2 minutes of flight time with a full GoPro and this LiPo on the quad. And I didn't even get to the part where I wanted to fly around people and all that kind of good stuff. So these things, ducks. So I basically made some custom ducks that will fit 3-inch props, and they fit on the Tadpole perfectly. I don't know, I'll show a picture sometime, but basically these are the, what are they, GEP-RC ducks, and I just cut off a little bit so that these go right over the motors and they don't interfere with anything. So it's giving a good amount of protection. They go all around the quad, so no motors are going to touch anything, but again, they weigh something. So put those suckers on, and I'm looking at let's see, 4.3 grams each roughly. So let's add them up. So 17.9 grams of ducting. Now, we were at 260 earlier for that build, for this little Tadpole build here. So we were at 260 with this thing, with the GoPro on it and the tiny battery on it. By the time you add another 20 grams of ducts, you're at 280. So this quad is starting to get pretty legit heavy, but it will perform. It'll do the job. It'll fly. It'll get the job done. I did try a Beta 95 to try and save some weight, and this is what is left of my Beta 95 experiment trying to carry a full GoPro on one of those. It didn't go well. The quad broke. It was horrible. It did fly, but not that well, not for that long. It was just way out of its element, and I really don't like the Beta FPV frames. This is where things get to the HD footage part of the equation. Now, you've probably noticed that my new Tadpoles have a split 3 on them. I have an Insta360, I have a full GoPro Hero 8. Why no naked Hero 6? Well, this is where my opinions are going to get a bit controversial, but bear with me. Beta 95, didn't like it. I think it's probably great for super light builds, for super advanced users, but for normal gorillas like me who fly like apes and have no soldering skills, it didn't end well. The flight controller broke. I blew a motor. The VTX was terrible. Bad experience, man. And it didn't perform ultimately. Just didn't perform. Even the regular Tadpole with the tiny motors outperformed the friggin' Beta 95 by leaps and bounds. Like, it just flew way better with this sucker on it. No comparison, no hesitation. But that's not designed to carry something heavy because the motors get hot, the quad's not happy. So that's where this thing comes in, because it's got the bigger motors, it's well tuned. But things don't stop here. So let's actually look at our different FPV cam candidates. So welcome to the dilemma of how to get HD footage from your micro. Now you'll notice that there's no GoPro session on this table at the moment, and there are no naked GoPros. But we'll get to that. So first of all, for micro Acro, this guy, a full Hero 8, no bueno, too heavy. It's 100 grams, no way, not gonna work. Your flight time is gonna be about 1 minute or 2 minutes, and your quad's gonna be super heavy and respond like crap. Not gonna work at all. So the other two options are the Runcam split. So I have the split 3 whoop, and I have the Insta360 Go. So there is a lot of hype about this little camera down here. And I can say that this camera has pros and cons. The pros obviously are the form factor and the ease of use. It just works super well with the iPhone app. So you fly, you download your videos to this thing, you can control this thing with your phone, and it works really well, even in the field. This thing also does really good stabilization. So all of those little wobbles and stuff that your micro is gonna have, the stabilization on this guy is gonna totally get rid of that. It also makes it really easy to share your videos in different formats. So you have different stabilization options. You can kind of do a flow state, which will keep the horizon completely level. If you want a more cinematic look, you have something called FPV stabilization, which it'll let the horizon move, and you can do loops and rolls, and it smooths all that out. It gives you some great looking acro flying, and you have raw mode, which has no stabilization. Those are the pros of this camera. It gives you the stabilization, it's easy to use, and yeah, it's light, small, but it also has some pretty hefty cons though. So in my opinion, my biggest gripe with this thing, first of all, is the reliability of it. So it's not that the camera itself is broken, but the problem I've had is that, okay, this thing does have a 5-minute FPV mode in it that they enabled in firmware. But in reality, for me, I found that that does not work every single time you fly, because what will happen is if the camera gets full, or if the camera gets too hot, it's gonna shut off and stop recording automatically without you knowing. And there is no way for you to know what's up, like while you're flying. And it overheats a lot, like almost every other flight. The only way I can get this thing to give me 5 minutes reliably is if I have to, first of all, empty the camera, everything off the hard disk, because it's got, I think, 8 GBs inside there. So I got to empty everything out of it and cool it down between flights. So basically, it's almost like you have to take 1 or 2 packs off for every pack you fly with it. And depending when you fly, that can be a real bummer, because if you're flying later in the day, the sun goes down, the light changes, and and you're not flying as much as you could, because you're basically waiting for your camera to cool down on you. The other big negative of this, now I haven't had this problem, but other people have, which is the durability. So if you scratch the lens on this, game over, camera's finished, no bueno. You cannot replace the lens. And if the lens is scratched, the camera can no longer function properly because it cannot focus and it cannot really work. The other drawback with this thing that I have is the image quality. So it's got a lot of artifacts. Like, the images that come out of this are not sharp, they're not detailed, they're not crisp, they're really smooth and flowy and all that. But they're full of JPEG artifacts, the colors are off, the lighting is weird, it looks really muddy to me. So what I do with this camera to get the best possible quality is I'm actually downloading everything off the camera into my computer. So it's got a little USB here, so you plug that into your computer, it shows up as a USB drive, and then there's the Insta360 Go app on your machine that lets you basically take the files right off this camera, and you can export them at a slightly higher bit rate, and you can do editing and all that cool stuff on the PC. And what I do is that I take the videos onto my computer through the Insta360 program, export them at 40 megabits per second, and then I put them into Final Cut, and you have to do like so much crap to them on Final Cut to make them look even half decent. So I have to I noticed that bumping the sharpness way up and bumping the saturation way up is like the minimum that you have to do to get these images to look fine. And any Insta360 video I've posted has that done to it. You're talking like a ton of sharpness and a ton of saturation boost. Like, that's just what I've found. And it comes out looking kind of okay in the end, but it's nowhere near that good old GoPro quality. It's just not. The other option you've got is the split. So the split is actually surprisingly good in terms of the image quality. The image on this thing is super crisp, super sharp, really nicely detailed. And installing the split, assuming you have room in your frame, it's actually only one connector. So to install it, you have one plug here that connects your camera to the flight controller, and that's it. That's all you got to do. You can optionally wire this into your flight controller and control it with Betaflight and all that good stuff, but you don't have to. So all you do is you pop your SD card into it in the back right down here. So you pop in a SD card, and by default, every time you fly, it switches on and it records your flight automatically up to the limit of whatever SD card you put into it. So assuming you've got a good SD card, it's not bad because it does 1080p 60 frames per second, which is good. It has a half decent bit rate. I forget what it is. I think it's 40 or 50 megabits per second. So it's got a good bit rate. You've always got a nice HD recording of every single flight you did just by default without even having to really do anything. So it's super easy. Plus, when this thing's recording, you get a little light in your OSD where my thumb is that records. It tells you when it's recording, so you know what's up with the camera while you're flying. If it's recording, if it's not recording, which is really cool. The main thing you give up with this camera though is the stabilization. There is no stabilization with this guy. So what you need to make it work is a really, really well-tuned, smooth quad. And that is probably gonna be the biggest challenge for most people with this camera. The other thing I noticed is that on the wide field of view setting, it's got a gigantically crazy field of view, even wider than a GoPro. And the field of view, when it's on super wide with this thing, it's got these weird like edges. So where am I? Sorry about my fingers, but basically on this side and that side, at the extreme sides, there's this really weird like mega curve that happens. It's literally like almost got a 180-degree field of view, which is good in some ways and bad in other ways. I find that it makes the footage look a little bit disorienting and weird and too fisheye. Definitely not as good as the GoPro Super View, for sure. So, you know, you could get around that by changing the setting though, and that's something I have to play with, is changing the setting from super wide on this guy to maybe wide or even narrower if I want to try some cinematic up close kind of stuff where I'm not doing a bunch of floppies. I have to play with all that. But the other drawback that I noticed is that, particularly on my quads, if you look at the camera line here, oh, these are the little props actually. So let's get out the other guy. So I have one of my Tadpoles running 3-inch props, which is this guy, and the other one's running 2.5s. So basically props and video, man, is what I'm trying to say. The props are like right in the middle of your eyeballs, like they end up sort of right where they are. That's where you get these props, and they cover quite a bit of the screen as well. That's partly due to the frame I'm running and the fact that my camera is so low, but it is super annoying because it's just super annoying. So with 3-inch props and the split, the footage is super annoying. I still gotta play with it and see what I can do because I have to experiment a little bit more, but I've already noticed that the props and view are super annoying, as is the fisheye effect. But the image quality is pretty dang good. And maybe I'll chuck some footage in, I don't know. So one option I've got there is to, I already gave it away, but I can reduce that by running 2.5-inch props if I want. And the quad's still gonna Acro really well because it's still gonna be really light with only a split on it. So another option I have, and this is what I'm playing with right now, is to try 2.5-inch props and get those props a little bit out of the view. They're still a little bit in the image, but not nearly as much. So I may be able to work with that, and the performance is still okay. There's no magic silver bullet yet to the requirement for sexy HD footage out of your micro that I have found. That option is too heavy. Even a session, although it's lighter, a session is still around 70-something grams. It's still too heavy to do hardcore Acro. I tried it. There's a reason my sessions are not here, and I'll get into that in a second. The split could be an option, but the downsides are props in view and no stabilization, plus it's nowhere near a GoPro. So no matter what you do, you're not gonna get GoPro quality footage out of a split. Although it's much better than I thought, it ain't no GoPro. But this thing here also ain't no GoPro by any stretch. This thing has stabilization, but gives you muddy video if you're lucky and the camera doesn't overheat. So what is the solution? Well, that's where I'm at now. And since I'm stubborn, I am gonna find a solution for this. And in fact, we have a solution on the way shortly. Actually, 2 possible solutions. The good thing is I have the quads to a point where the quads are smooth. So now I can start really evaluating what I can do with the split. There was no point trying to review the split until I had a smooth flying quad. So I needed to tune my Tadpoles first, which I did finally, and now they fly good. Not perfect, but good. So I can start playing with the Swift? So I can start playing with the Split 3 now and see how that compares to the Insta360. But honestly, I already know that the absolute gold standard is no, it's not the Naked Hero 6, like a lot of people are thinking. No, 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 no. Why? Because the Hero 6 is fragile, it is expensive, it's tricky to do if you're not super dexterous. It's not reliable either, according to what I've seen on the forums and stuff. It's fantastic that the guys are figuring out how to do that though, because I do think that the gold standard unicorn magic solution to everything is gonna be a Naked Hero 8. Because that gives you the best image quality of any of the GoPros. It gives you stabilization out of the box, so you can choose whether you want to just run the GoPro with hyper smooth on it, or if you want to run that footage to real steady and get that hyper cinematic flat, horizon lock on and all that stuff. It gives you those options, but out of the box, hyper smooth is insane because it will get rid of all those little vibrations and it smooths your footage out, so you're guaranteed to get delicious footage out of a micro, because a Naked Hero 8 is gonna weigh probably around, mid, like 35 grams for a light version, and you'll probably get below that for a proper hardcore naked version, give or take what you use for the case and all that. But that weight area is only 10 grams more than a Insta360, and these quads barely notice the Insta360. So that's where you're gonna have the option to start doing a little bit of Acro and mixing that in with your sexy footage on a tiny quad. The other option we're looking at though is a naked session. Oh, that's right. Now, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. So the typical naked cameras are shaped like that. They're like the palm of your hand. They're big, they're flat. I know the UMA95 one has the board that lies down and the little camera on it, but you can't really mount that on every single quad. So a lot of the naked GoPros or the GoPro Lights come in like a look at my palm form factor, whereas the Session is already a nice form factor. So all you're doing is ripping the battery out of the Session and stripping all the extra stuff off. And I happen to know that you can get those down to around 33 grams with the TPU mount, which is not much more weight than a Insta360 Go again. And the Session should be much more durable, and it should, if you have a smooth quad, it should give you some really gorgeous GoPro quality footage. And you'll have Pro Tune, you can change the settings on your phone. It's not gonna compare to the Hero 8 Black, but it should work. And the Session 5 also is supposed to work with real steady. So even if you're not using Hero 6 and you're using a Session, you should still have that real steady option if you want that, but in a much better form factor. So that's where I'm at. I'm kind of waiting for the ultimate naked Hero 8 to come out that's lightweight and durable, or maybe this naked Session. I'm personally of the opinion that I'm gonna let all the guys do the tinkering and stuff like that, but my theory is that all the knowledge that the community has gained from tearing down the GoPro 6 is gonna pour over to the Hero 8. You might be thinking, what the hell? Who would tear down a Hero 8? Well, interestingly enough, where I live here, a Hero 8 costs the same as a Hero 6. So the idea that a Hero 6 is always going to be cheaper is not necessarily true. Now, there are guys who are just buying the boards off Banggood and all that kind of stuff, and that's a pretty cheap and effective option, but that should also be possible for the naked Hero 8 at some point as well. You know, buy a main board, buy a lens and LCD or whatever, and just make your own without tearing down a GoPro. Long story short though, I'm hoping for a naked Hero 8 that has a decent case. That would solve all my problems. And at that point, we have hit nirvana, which is the point where you can have a micro quad that's probably gonna weigh around 250 or sub 250, and it's gonna be able to get as awesome footage as your 5-inch, hands down. The performance is not a problem with the 3 inches. They perform, they've got punch, they've got agility, and all that good stuff. They fly a little different than a 5-inch, but capability-wise, they can do all the things, whether it's endurance or whatever. We're just missing that really lightweight, high-quality HD cam. And yeah, if you're passionate about that stuff, which I am, it's got to be a GoPro of some sort. So that's what's up so far. There's one other thing, though. And that one other thing is this little guy here. But I'm going to cover this guy in a separate video. So this is the Patchray quad. And this guy is going to get a little video all on his own. But basically, I've been so busy lately playing with tadpole builds and destroying quads and all that stuff. I've also been advising the guy who's designing this. Not advising really, more like annoying him and breaking his quads. And then, helping him test and tune and all that kind of stuff. This little quad is a very interesting piece of work. So that's also been on the side project back burner. Anyhow, that's all I gotta say for now. I am probably not gonna vlog from the bench ever again. I don't know, we'll see. But that's what's up. It's been hectic, busy, confusing, and weird, and a lot of stuff going on. I don't even know if this video will be coherent, but through the magic of editing, it probably will be okay. And that's that. Now I have to get out and fly these puppies and have some fun. So adios. And wherever you are, I hope you're safe, well employed, happy, and all that good stuff. Because man, the world's just crazy these days. So, every time I think I'm crazy for playing with quads, I just think about all the other stuff going on in the world and I think, yep, it could be a lot worse. So